So I have been talking to several founders in the room, and there's different stages of founders in the room, right? Some of you have employees already, fully staffed team, but we also have some founders in the room that have not fully put their foot in yet, right? Some people are probably working another job and coming up with their company on the side. So question for the both of you, right? There's always like a product market fit or, a gap in the market. I'm sure you always have that question of, why did you start your company? So digging a little deeper, when did you have that aha moment? That part where I'm like, okay, I'm going to fully immerse myself to this startup because I believe in what I do and this is my aha moment. Where were you? And when was that?
Okay, I guess I'll start. So, I think when you're just thinking about starting an idea and, the number one thing that I've learned after starting my second company, so my first company was Revolt Electric Bikes, was that I was not financially stable. I quit my job and I was like, I'm going all in. Well, the truth was I didn't have a lot of money. I had no network. I really didn't have a lot of skills. And I was like, great, let's start a company. Well, that didn't really work out because it turns out you need money to live and you need to know where your next paycheck's coming from. And so I think for me, when I was starting a company was that one, I really had to know that I had financial stability. I wasn't just going to light everything back on fire. And so for me, it was on nights and weekends, toying with different ideas. And it was only until I had actual conviction after about 6 or 9 months of truly, thinking about my idea, market research, talking to customers, coming up with little surveys, just, really having that true conviction was when I was able to finally actually say, all right, now I'm all in. And it also had to do with the fact that I was really tired of working for someone. But, it just, you'll know in your heart when it's you know what, I can put this all behind me now. And so that's what changed for me, and that's what launched Vegan Health.
I was a student when I started Codi. I was at UC Berkeley across the bridge. I was studying city planning. I've always been obsessed with designing better cities and neighborhoods, making them a better place to work and live in. And I think coming from France, I had kind of a culture shock about how cities function in the US. And I wanted to kind of create a solution for underutilized spaces. At the time, what was sitting empty was homes. So our first iteration of Codi was actually converting homes into a co-working space for the day. And then the person living there would come back at night and kind of earn revenue. So kind of Airbnb meets WeWork. But that was the moment, I did this while I was still at school. And I had another job and stuff like that. So it was very intense. I remember the reason why I did not pursue having a real job, and I've never worked anywhere else than Codi, is in my heart, I barely could sleep. I think I was obsessed with the idea. I felt it had to exist. All these empty spaces doesn't make sense. There's use for it. There's a need for it. And I thought I would just, if I don't do it, who is going to do it? So I just went for it.
Amazing. So you have this idea. You found out there is a fit in the market. You surveyed and did everything there. And you're to the pivotal point now where, okay, I think we have enough runway for us to hire our first employee, right? First 1, 2 employees, flip a 1099 to an employee. I think culture is very important, right? Because at this stage, there's only so much funds you have to hire that top talent. So my question for the both of you is, starting in this position in your life, how did you find that culture fit? Where did you look? What did you look for when you were hiring your first actual employee outside of you and your co-founder, let's say?
Well, if only it were that easy. A lot happened in between starting the idea and our first employee. And so maybe I'll walk you through that just because it is pretty crazy, because sometimes your first employee is sometimes you have 3 first employees. And what I mean by that is that your company goes through different iterations. And I would say the first one, it took us 2 years through the mud to even get to our first product. And that sounds crazy, but sometimes that's what it takes. And, the first time, our first teammate was not relevant the third time around. And, it sucks because like those people believe in you. Those people are like on for the journey, but it turns out that the second product or the third product iteration, those people, again, are no longer really like the strongest teammate anymore because they were the best one for the first round. And so I think, from a cultural standpoint, when you're so early stage, what really matters is someone who's like on board to just be in the chaos, someone that understands and gives you grace that you don't have it figured out. Our first product, it was actually, we started as an infant formula company. This was 5 years ago. So I brought in a team of scientists that did infant formula. We were working together for about a year until we figured out we weren't going to do infant formula. That was the most heartbreaking day of my life, having to say, it's over. I'm sorry. And we're taking the company in a different direction. So I think, thankfully, like they really understood and they were on board with it and they're professional. But again, from a cultural standpoint, it's really finding people who will be open to thriving in chaos because quite frankly, the first couple of years are going to be.
Yeah, we also went through 2 different pivots that were pretty significant. So the first employee is not going to be the first employee for a long time, typically. But when I think about these 2 pivots and how I definitely grew a ton of hire, and I think I hire much better now than when I started. So I'll tell you my mistakes. So hopefully you don't make. At the time, I was just like, anyone who would be very passionate, like I would be like, yes, join. And we would try it together. And it was like, just for the passion and the grit, not really for the skills. As I didn't know myself, like what exactly I was looking for, honestly. Like I had no idea what marketing meant compared to business development, compared to sales. So I was like, a business person would help me. And it was very vague. So I make a lot of mistakes that way, of just like, not having the right skills in the team. You can have somebody who's great in your culture, but like is not actually impacting positively your company. And the second iteration, I think there was like kind of a year where we had our early team and it didn't work out. I don't think it was like the right product anyway. It's not the right product market fit. I had to lay off almost my entire team and then kind of start from scratch again. But then the second time around, I was so deliberate about who I'm going to hire. I went to the companies that I admire the most, who are in a similar industry or have a similar product. And for the role I was hiring, like I admire that company for that specific department. So for instance, Airbnb, I love the branding of Airbnb. I love their marketing. I hired my head of marketing from Airbnb. Lyft is a great product. I hired my head of product from Lyft. I think WeWork, like as you probably noticed, like that's one of my biggest competitors, or was amazing at sales. Like they sold the hell out of co-working, while co-working existed 10 years before WeWork. I hired head of sales from WeWork. So I think that was very strategic around who I hire. But then it is important that they thrive with chaos. That's true. And so that's the danger of hiring from those great companies, is that then are they going to really be hardworking enough and like comfortable with the ambiguity and the difficulty of pivoting and stuff like that. And I found like the common thread was that they all had also an experience early stage. Either they've been a founder themselves, they tried to create their own company, or they joined very early on, or a company or like the company. For instance, the Lyft person that joined the company, my company, Codi, was number 7 at Lyft, and he stayed for like 5-7 years. That's also like, I think a little red flag that I would share with everyone is if the person jumped a lot too much, like every 6 months or 1 year, like you see them jump to a different company, that's not a great sign. Like you do want somebody who can stay and, stick it through the difficulties. That's my advice.
Learned some gems there. That's actually really good advice. Specifically what resonated me is finding companies that you admire and looking at the talent there so that you can get inspired with your own companies. So that's fascinating. I do want to touch on pivoting because both of you said that word, and I think this is an important topic to cover. And you said it very eloquently, Madeline, like it's devastating, right? It's hard. You are stuck in this idea. Maybe it's not a good product market fit, or you need to pivot, whatever the case is. How did you handle that internally? how did you communicate that with your employees internally, or your investors, and how did you handle that externally?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk about pivoting because I'm a big supporter of pivoting your ass off, okay, until you find the thing that actually works. So as I mentioned, I started with a baby formula company. I thought I was going to, build this big $1 billion company to rival the big Abbott Lab and Mead Johnson's of the world. Well, it turned out we needed like $3 million, but we actually needed $10 million, but we actually really needed $100 million. And there was no way I was going to raise any of that. And so what we did was we ended up having to pivot because we had no choice. We weren't raising the money. And so that was really tough, talking to investors that they had just backed us on this big idea that we were building the next baby formula company. And they're like, you're a bad CEO. You can't raise money. That's your number one job. Okay, well, you know what? They can sit down because we were going to come up with a new plan. And so that was really, it's really tough because you feel like a failure, of course. But I really do believe there's only one difference between winning and losing, and that's not stopping or giving up. Like that is, if everybody in this room, like if you love your idea or you just love this path, the only thing that can stop you from winning is if you actually just give up. And so for me, giving up was not an option. It's just like I learned that the hard way after shutting my first company. And, sometimes you have a little bit of regret. Like, I wish, I would have just kept going because imagine what it could have been. And so if you leave with nothing here except do not stop, do not give up, I think that is going to be something that just like really lifts you through this journey. But ultimately, I think I want to touch one more thing on pivoting is that I'll save you the drama, but 2 pivots later, it actually forced us into a better business model. And for that, I'm eternally thankful that, one, we couldn't raise the money. We struggled, to get customers with the first 2 iterations or whatever. We couldn't even get the product really in the first 2 iterations. But once you actually get to the thing that's going to work, you will realize why you went through it, because it forces you to be a better business person and to launch a better business. So just keep pivoting until you find the thing that works.
Definitely super aligned there as well. Pivoting is part of the journey of any company. I think a company that does not pivot, it's very strange to me. So we pivoted twice. The first one was going from B2C to B2B that I think a lot of companies go through. Especially like when you're a young visionary founder, like you want to save the world, you do a B2C company. And then you realize like actually you need to make money and have a business model and like grow this far and this fast. And that's a lot easier with B2B. We did this pivot because we actually noticed that, so initially we were using homes and we would have freelancers book like 1 seat at a time, and it was very difficult to scale. And then we would have startups book the entire home twice a week. And that was like 80% of our revenue. So very fast, like you see that in the data very clearly, like what is going to drive your growth. And that was it. Like that was a company booking the entire space like on a regular base. So we went slowly towards B2B, and then the pandemic hit. So pandemic hit for like any business that was physical operations and office use like we were, it was a slap in the face. So like we could not operate for month and month. Weirdly, that's when I hired my best employees. I don't know why they joined us at this moment. It was, at the time we were like, oh, pandemic is like 3 months, but it was not. But like we pivoted so many times. And like one of our core values is listen, learn, and iterate. And that was so core to these 2 years from 2020 to 2022 in like just not losing sight of your vision and what you're trying to achieve and what's the problem that you're solving. The mistake I did, and that made us like waste like a year, is that I was so in love with the solution that I lost track of the problem. And when I say that, is like basically I was so in love with like homes and running like kind of, an office space out of a home, that I lost track of like the actual problem we're solving is vacancy, is when there's like the space is sitting empty and we want to bring life back to it, make it useful. Homes were no longer sitting empty. People were working from home now. Offices were sitting empty. And so it took me a whole year to accept that like we have to change our supply, and our supply is no longer going to be residential spaces, it's going to be offices, which, you know, I hated WeWork personally. Like I hated these type of experiences and things like that. So like I had like kind of a problem with that for a long time. And then when we started to onboard some of that supply, and then it just like completely took off. So again, like I think the data will tell you whenever it's the right pivot. And I would say don't wait too long. If something is not working, you know, yes, keep trying, but like keep trying in the iterations. Do not like stay really stuck in one specific direction, because that's where your heart really is, you know? And then when we completely pivoted towards commercial real estate, in 6 months, we raised our Series A. And it took us 2 years to get to that moment where we pivoted. And so I think it's just, you'll see when you reach that product market fit, and pivoting is like really essential to reaching product market fit.
Actually, before we jump into the raise, something that stuck with what you just said, and for the founders in the room, is you talked about commercial real estate and residential and the market. What are your thoughts about like the remote workforce, and like what are your projections, or like as of today, right? You're B2C, you're B2B. Do you believe in having employees sit in an office and go to the office every day? Do you believe in hybrid? And again, that's subjective, right? But what is your thoughts with your personal subcategory, right, of what you guys do?
Sure. I'm obviously very biased. I believe in in-person culture. Our team is actually hybrid. So we have some specific functions that are completely remote. But then we hired by hub. So we have a team in the Bay Area, we have a team in New York, and we go to the office basically once or twice a week. And I think that's like a very good balance. I'm not a big fan of like mandating, twice a week in the office or 3 days a week in the office. Like people are not babies. Like I think like they can choose for themselves, and they're adults, and I want to be respectful of their choice. So I don't impose it. But I think if you want to have in-person culture and see your employees, your team in person, and build like stronger bond and build like a strong culture, it's you need to kind of be deliberate around where you hire. Because if you don't pay attention right now, then you're going to end up with like 20 employees like across the US or across the world. And by default, by design, then it's a remote culture. And that's okay if that's what you want. That's more typically like an engineering type of culture. Like my co-founder is the CTO. Like I cannot drag him to the office, and that's okay. He's gonna code in his garage, and that's fine. So all the engineers are fully remote, but the sales team, the CS team, the marketing team, like they all want and thrive through in person. And I think it's really you who choose what type of culture you want. We are seeing a shift from fully remote to more hybrid type of cultures throughout any type of stage of companies right now. Can tell you because like we see people who come in and like ask for office space on our platform, and they were born during the pandemic. They started as a remote company, and now they're kind of switching more towards like having an in-person component on a regular basis.
I guess I'll kind of keep this short because my answer is remote work does not work. I'm sorry. I think I'm telling you this as a remote company. But, I think the companies of the future, yes, there's going to be a little bit more, fluid nature of like maybe 4 days a week or something. There's going to be built-in flexibility that we never had before. But I think the best companies of the future are going to continue to build and be in person. And the reason for that is just the amount of iteration, the amount of just collaboration, the ideas that are bouncing just happen so much quicker at a higher frequency when you're in person and together. And I think that as early stage companies, like we already have the entire world against us. So like you have to have that like in-person energy to really take on these big industries. And so I think the future, I think the best companies will be in person. But of course, I think there's always, of course, going to be the hybrid model, I think, going forward.
Perfect. Okay, so we talked about culture. We talked about the pivot. So let's talk about your last round. I'll start with the easy one. What milestones or achievements were critical in positioning your startup from your last round?
Last round for us was Series A. Anyone in the room is seed stage? All right, so I'll talk to you. Series A is very different from the seed round. Is anyone here pre-seed and looking to raise a seed round? Okay. But Series A, so like it was 2022 when we raised. It was March 2022. 2 weeks later, the market went to shit. And so we were very lucky in that timing. And for the past 2 years, it's been really difficult for like mostly Series A and Series B. Series Seed, I think, has been a bit impacted, but a lot less than the other two. At the seed stage, it's about you and your vision and how big you can be and why you are the right person. Why you can defeat all the competitors because you're going to never give up. At the Series A, you need a strong kind of small team, right? People that like, it's not just you anymore. Like there's multiple people that the investors are going to bet on. And it's like, okay, they can hire. It's also a proof of like, you can hire really great talents. So you need to show that with your early team. Still big vision and everything. But at that point, like it's important to show signs of product market fit, but strong signs. We were not at the volume of a Series A. We're not at 1 million revenue. We were slightly under, but we grew so fast within a short period of time that like I went to raise my A like when it was 4 months after we hit product market fit. So it was just like 4 months of data points where it was growing 60% month over month. And that's it. So like it's really around like it depends on the investors, of course, but like I believe more in growth than I believe into like checking boxes of like specific milestones. I think investors get really excited about the growth rate more than okay, you make X amount. There's always a company that will make more money than you.
Single raise is different, and there is no one size fits all. You'll hear the stories like, this is the deck that got this company $10 million. Anyone ever seen those? Yeah, okay. That was false. Like the deck didn't do shit. I'm sorry. The deck was just like the icing on the cake. What really happened was like this whole crazy process that actually had nothing to do with the deck and had to do with market timing, had to do who you knew, who like back channeled you and like said something like nice about you or tanked your whole deal. This process is crazy. How many of you have already started fundraising? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you plan to fundraise in the next like 12 months? Okay. And then how many here plan to be billionaires? All right. Every single hand in the room needs to be up here. Okay. Look, if you're going to fundraise, you need to tell these investors that you plan to be a billionaire. Okay. Just like straight up look in their face and be like, we are building $1 billion company. And like, if you don't get on track right now, then like you are going to miss out. And I think that is my biggest like lesson in this whole journey. The first time that I went out to fundraise, it was like, oh, like we're really going to build this company and we think there's a lot to, to believe in here. And guess what? I pitched 300 people and everybody said no. Because they didn't believe. And you have to kind of build that story that is like, no, we are building the biggest company. This is going to be game changing. And you're the one that's missing out. And the minute that story changes is like when people are like, oh, whoa, okay, I want to be on that train. And I think so, 2 pieces of advice with fundraising and what worked for us was number 1 is like, you have to have the confidence, you have to have the conviction that you are building the world's biggest, most important, impactful company on this planet. Number 2, and you got to show it and prove it. And I think that's the difference between, oh, no one's investing in me, and like, look at my metrics every single month is a hockey stick. Like, it's just traction. Like, show me what your proof. And the minute that proof is there, plus the story, like that's when you start getting money. So I will tell you, it took me 2 years to figure that out, but hopefully today you learn that and you don't take 2 years to learn that.
When building your deck, any advice or anything where you're like, oh, I wish I could go back. I wish I did this, whether it has to do with something that you put on that when you were pitching or even like an ecosystem, right? Did you not have a mentor at that time that really didn't help push you to that point? Like anything to look back at where you're like, I should have done that?
That's a very tough question because there's a lot of different points where, yes, we can have done better. I think the deck in general, like not making it too long, right? So like 10 pages, and that's like really hard for me to do a 10-page deck. I have so much to say about the company and where I want to take it and stuff. So typically the first iteration, I have like a 15, 20-page deck. That's a non-starter. So I would do like the first deck, like more like shorter, like 10 minutes, 10 slides. And then when you practice the pitch, like 8 minutes was my goal. Like, do not pitch for longer than 8 minutes because you have typically a 30-minute call with the investor. I like to have the control initially to tell my story without interruptions. So, like, typically, I would ask the investor, "Can I just present you give you the pitch?" And so I go through the deck and 8 minutes, and then we have more of a conversation. One thing I always ask at the end of the investment meeting is, what is your biggest concern about what we do? And then they will give me the real answer, because an investor is really hard for them to give you, to be honest, around like why they're not going to invest. You can ask like, why wouldn't you invest? But it's a bit blunt. So typically I ask like, okay, what's your biggest concern? What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge? And that's like the truth of why they're not going to invest. And so I want that piece of information so that I can make my deck and my pitch better. And so every single time, then I would go back to the deck and I would iterate and like change stuff so that I understand better how they perceive the story I told. But then the deck, there's a ton of resources out there around how to build a deck and what are the different steps. I think it's useful.
I guess, for the seed stage, when you're thinking about your first, and it may be different, I think maybe for the Series A, but at the seed stage, it's like you can have the most beautiful deck in the world. They're only going to they're going to look at you, they're going to listen to you, and they're either going to decide that they're interested or they're not. And so, I personally don't place as much emphasis on the deck, but I think that it's more about just like, do they believe you? And if you are believable, and if you are not, then, good luck. You're not going to raise money. I'm sorry. But it's really just like the conviction in you. And I think the thing that I would say for fundraising is like, if you have that conviction, like even if you need to just like survive, like picking up 5, 10K checks, like small little money to like get you to the traction. Again, the only thing that will change an investor's mind usually is like proof. Where's the proof that this company is going to work? And if you have a chart, you have growth, and you look like you have the skills and you're demonstrating it, like you will get funded. There is someone out there for you. And so it just might take you a lot of conversations to get there, but you just don't stop and you'll get there.
One more question, and then I'll open it up to everyone else to ask. The elephant in the room, having 3 females up here. I can go to a whole nother panel about talking about raising and building your company as a female or LGBTQ plus and so forth, right? For those in the room, and we know those that are getting invested, who gets more founders, male founders, as you know, historically, get more investment than women, right? And I can go on with other percentages and so forth. For those in the room that don't live in markets, let's say, that are not the Bay Area, where there is not a lot of round of funding, or for those in the room who are minorities and so forth, like being founders and being out there and experiencing your stories, like, again, you can go on to a different panel. Is there anything that you felt that was like your superpower? Like, I am different, I'm a female founder, I use this, and I guess some advice you could give to these founders out there that are raising.
Yeah, it's difficult because first, like being a founder is very lonely, whatever your gender is. And then being a female founder is like second, even more lonelier. And then my industry is real estate, where it's like 98% male, prop tech. And so that's like gets you, I think it's actually kind of a superpower because you stand out. Like you're the only woman in the room. And most of the time when I go to a prop tech or a real estate event, I'm the only woman in the room. And it's, people, there are a lot of prejudice against women. And that's probably why we get a lot less funding. I think it's 2.4% of the funding is going to female founders, which is demoralizing to think about. But at the same time, the ones that do get the funding, when you look, I think there are stats that show the reverse effect of like the IPOs by women. Like we're starting to see a lot more. And I think that I saw some sort of study that shows that like female-led companies have a lot more chance of success because like it got, it's a lot harder to get where you are. So like it shows you really stood out. So I think that's something that you can think about. Like personally, I like to not think about my gender and just like stay super focused. And I'm like, I think we all deserve a shot. And if you're really passionate, like gender is not important. In the Bay Area, we're lucky to be in a place where there are women who are getting funding and there are women who are investing, because the root of the problem is like male investors, right? Like that they are the one who give the check. So if 98% of investments is coming from males, then you can make the math. So I think maybe going into, if you're struggling and you think you're getting like kind of discriminated against, I would recommend to go to like female founders group. They exist. There's also like female investors, and talk to them and their experience. And you'll get like a little bit more help. I would also say like there are male investors that are great, and they invest in women, and it's pretty clear they invest in women because like you can look at like the past 5-10 investments, and they are outstanding women that they invested in. So I think that's also a way to like look for, not waste your time, and look for investors who don't have that prejudice against women. I think one top thing also, I'll say like one personal thing about being a female founder, like I actually have a baby, and I think, we kind of are pushed to showing that we're strong and blah, blah, blah. And like being a mom is like against that kind of. And I want to encourage any women to like not give shit about this. And like, if you want to have a kid, like have a kid, you can do both 1,000%.
Well, I guess I have a little bit of a more controversial opinion when it comes to this, but I think in my experience, first of all, like you nailed it. I think being a woman is a superpower. Like I cannot tell you, like we are not oppressed. I am sorry. And like the fact that we are up here on stage, like is living proof that it is absolutely possible to get funding, build a company, like have change in the world. And so I think actually one of my mistakes was for too long attending women-only events. And they were just these huge circle, I won't use the word, but you'll get it, of like, we are, we're oppressed and like, it is so hard. And I realized that I was like, you know what, the minute that I broke out of that was I started talking to people who were successful, and they removed that whole thing. I was like, look, just do metrics, tell the story this way, do it this way. It turned out it had nothing to do with my gender. And I think actually one of the knocks I will say on women is that sometimes our ideas are not bold enough. They're not innovative enough sometimes, and they're not technical enough. And it's like, of course we're not getting funding, because like somebody's building an AI company and here we're building, something that is maybe has already been done or something like that. And so sometimes I do knock on women for that. It's like, we do need to have these big ideas and bold ideas. And guess what? We're going to be able to compete just like everybody else. And so like we had the same jobs as everybody else. We had the same education as everybody else. There's absolutely no reason that we can't get the funding like everybody else. And so I just, I'm the #1 proponent, of course, of women founders. And I hope to be an example and lead by example there. But you know what? Like, let's use it as our superpower, not as something that's against us.
So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So what we touched on today, for those that may have run a little late, we touched on pivoting, right? Your story regarding pivoting, raising, as well as like culture fit and hiring your first employees. With that being said, does anyone have any questions for any of these amazing founders up here? I'm going to start from front to back.
Okay, yeah, you talked about pivoting, and specifically you talked about pivoting from B2C to B2B. What did that do with your investors? Because usually the expectation in B2B is somewhat different from B2C, isn't it, in terms of how the business could eventually explode?
I think they prefer B2B, so they were happy. Yeah, B2C is just, it's harder. You need a lot more users to have the same revenue. Where with a company, it basically, a company means like 50 times what you would have with one individual customer. So I think in general, like VCs really like B2B because it's easier to scale and to make more revenue. So personally, my experience, no, I don't. I actually don't ask my investors for consent on anything. I'm like, that's what I'm doing, and that's it. And I think they've always been very supportive and give me kind of insights and kind of advice to how to then become a B2B company or pivot and stuff like that. But I haven't felt any downside from them or perception from them around like B2B versus B2C and whether one is better than the other.
I had a question about like female founder groups. Like, do you know any specific like female founder investment groups or just like female founder groups?
Yeah, one of my business angels, they called F7. It's 7 women who were tech leaders at Facebook, and they kind of got together 7 of these women and like created that fund, F7. And it's like pre-seed and seed. I would highly recommend them.
I'll just add on that. I've had really tough time with women investors, I'll be honest. And I think sometimes like women investors themselves like are sometimes actually harder to pitch than men. And you just have to be careful. But I do recommend finding people who are mentors that are already female founders that are successful and get some of their advice. And sometimes they'll bring you under their wing and open up their networks to you. But I would honestly steer clear.
Hi, I'm a technical founder building a B2B product, and I wanted to know what was your experience with, closing, say, your first 50 sales, and how did you build that into a repeatable process?
You B2C, right? I really suck at selling. I think initially I was really bad. And I was almost like embarrassed to sell. And then I would not, I just realized basically I'm not the right person. Although like that's kind of counterintuitive. Like you hear a lot of like founders-led sales as being the superpower initially. So if you have that skill, that's awesome. I didn't. I was great with customers. When they were sold on Codi, then they would be my best friends. But like before that, I was just like so anxious and I couldn't do it. So I hired somebody who's a seller and at the early stage of the company, and he led it. And I was there. I listened to him and I learned. And now I can do a lot of sales. And I'm probably, if I became at some point like the best seller in the company. But I think it's, I had to learn. And so I hired somebody to help me do that. Was your question around like, how do you get your 50 first customers? So that got me to like the first 10 customers, let's say. So like that person, and I helped him out, but like he was mostly like the one knowing how to run a sales process. And then from that to 10 to 50, we did grow the sales org. So we hired like a sales rep, but it took us a long time, honestly, to hire that first person. So you need to be really sure around like what's your playbook and what is this person going to do and things like that. And then I think it's really hard to find the right profile. You don't know until they actually start. You can ask about like, okay, how much did you sell before and things like that. But I would recommend to hire somebody who has sold a similar product so that you have a bit more confidence that they can hit the ground running. And so we hired 2 reps per market, and now like I'm learning still about like how much they can sell.
Hi there. For Christelle, just actually following up on when you were building your team and recruiting, I was just curious about like tactically, how'd you do that? Did you use a recruiter? Did you reach out personally on LinkedIn? Because you mentioned you recruited Airbnb people and Lyft people and so forth. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not have a recruiter. It's very expensive. I still do not have a recruiter. Like I hired an in-house recruiter to avoid paying an agency because like it's 20% fee. It's crazy. But no, so like LinkedIn. I would actually, you know, when you have Sales Navigator, you can filter out by companies. So I would filter the companies that I like, and then by city, and then I would just like reach out. And then referrals. So investors, advisors, existing employees, like are your best pool of people who can refer great talents. If you know, they're typically super talented themselves, they're gonna refer talented people. So that's been a really good source. I want to say something else that I forgot. Oh yes, for Airbnb, that's like actually a fun story in the sense of in 2020, Airbnb and still like every year, like companies do big layoffs, right? 2020, Airbnb laid off their entire Lux team out of Montreal. So they didn't do anything wrong. It's just like they got rid of that product, right? My dream was always to hire like somebody from Airbnb in marketing. And so I reached out, the list was published a day later. And I reached out to every single person from the marketing team the day after the layoff, and one responded and became my head of marketing. And she's still with us 3 years later. Brex just laid off like 20% of their employees like this week. The first thing I did when I heard about it is like look through the list of people that they laid off. Like there are great talent at those companies that you can talk to and potentially hire.
So I have a question around outsourcing. So think about like the first round, no matter it's pre-seed or seed, where you have no connection, like no experience. What are some strategies that you use to get founders, I guess, when the rejection rate is super high?
Okay, I've been there. It sucks. You know what even sucks more is people you know write checks that know you still don't write checks to you. You're like, how are you supposed to get started? You will find someone. You just have to go through insane stuff to find them. One of the tactics I used early on was doing hashtag like consumer investors on Twitter. And like people will just say like, I'm a consumer investor, and you build this insane list of just random Twitter people and you DM them all. Hey, it looks like you invest in D2C or consumer. Can you talk? Like I have a kid's gut microbiome health company. So you'll send like maybe 200 and 3 will respond, and maybe you can get one of them. And so it's really like insane amount of just research, finding individuals who can write, even if it's like a $3,000 check. Like some people wouldn't advise this, but I'm telling you, like it was our only choice. You know, nobody was writing me some big, you know, seed round check. So just to get started, it was like, can you do $2,500? Can you do $3,000? Can you do $5,000? Can you do $10,000? And that was how we got our initial just survival cash to even be able to demonstrate that we had a product. And so a lot of times in consumer, like you can't even show you have a business unless you built it. Whereas in software, it's a little different. But yeah, just don't be afraid to ask. You have to just say, are you willing to invest X amount? We would love to have you be part of that team.
I think it's a great advice, like the asking, like that took me years to actually be comfortable enough to say, like, do you want to invest? Because you're so scared of like the no that like you actually don't ask. And that's dumb when you think about it. It's like, well, you know, you present your company, just ask. And I think that's a great advice. If I can add one thing is like, so I was at school when I started. I didn't get any like into accelerator programs and stuff, but I wish I did because I think it accelerated the introductions and like made it easier for a lot of the folks that did go to accelerator programs. So I think that's also a way, if you're a foreigner, like, and you don't have like much connections, which was my case, I think it would have helped to go into like a vetted accelerator that people know about, because they're going to open the doors.
Hi, I'm Benedicta. So I have a question about organic growth and traction. I want to piggyback off the sales question Christelle answered for seed. So basically, before Codi came into light, before you actually even got the spaces, you were using people's homes. How were you able to even just get people saying, you know what, or make them think about it like, I'm actually not at home. I want to use my home for a workspace? How do you just want to get into people's heads when they're thinking about it, but they're really not thinking about it? So you want to let them know, I know you're thinking about it, but I want to be in your face.
So how did I get my first host?
Yeah.
A residential host?
Yeah.
The very first one was a friend from school. So I would show up in his house and then bring donuts and then like text people to come co-work with me. And that was the first like Codi session. That is not like scalable. Like it's like, but it helped me build the product at least. But it's kind of like a fake host. The real first host we went to, so I was at Berkeley. We wanted to kick it off in Oakland. So we went to, I went with a friend to coffee shops with flyers, and we went to all the coffee shops in Oakland, and we did that for 4 weeks in a row. And my friend, I was like a lot more shy than my friend. So my friend was like the one asking like, hey, you working, on your laptop in the coffee shop? Like we are building this thing. Like, do you want to be a host or a member? Sign up. And we got 200 signups within 6 weeks of doing this. And part of that were like, I think 30% of them wanted to be a host. So we found them in coffee shops working on their laptop, basically.
Over to you, Madeline. So you talked about hashtags. I like that idea, especially in the digital age. And you probably want to get, some of us want to get, beta users and hopefully convert them to customers. What would you advise, just being in that social media space?
Yeah. So one of the ways that we got our early customers was actually using DMs on Instagram and also joining a ton of communities on Facebook. So finding communities that will love your product, and you literally have to just try to pitch every single one of them one-on-one. And that was how we got started. So you follow hashtags. For us, it was following constipation hashtags. So who's constipated here? And then I was my whole life, and that's why I started this company. But you follow those hashtags and you find the people who you think would be your best customer or someone who aligns with the pain point, and you just pitch them. So, you just get in front of them and get in their face and say, hey, look, I got a solution for you.
We have 6 minutes left, 2 more questions. And then afterwards, I'm sorry if I didn't get to anyone else. They will be here for the next few minutes, but let's do the last 2.
What's good? My name is Nikolai Williamson. I'm working on a startup to help international high schoolers around the world really figure out where they want to invest the next couple of years of their lives, also outside the classroom, not just what's being taught.
Amazing.
Thank you. And my question is, when it comes to the time where you're hiring talent, whether it's at the point where you're looking for co-founders or you have enough money where you're like, all right, let's get somebody else on board. As the entrepreneur, as that founder, where your forte is really tapping into everybody else who's smarter than you in that particular field, how do you ensure that the people that you're actually hiring are doing what they're supposed to be doing? So what that might look like is, let's say I need a sales rep. How do I know that my sales rep is actually going out and doing what they need to do if I know absolutely nothing about sales?
All right. Well, I actually really experienced this because I hired a bunch of high, achieving PhDs and nutrition scientists. And I was 28 years old at the time and clearly didn't have that experience. And they were twice my age. And do you know the amount of times I heard, oh, you just don't understand. Oh, you just don't have this experience. I can tell you a lot. And I think that it was like, you're right. I don't have this experience. That was why I hired you. Because if I had this experience, I wouldn't need you. And I think that, as an entrepreneur, we know, are they really doing, are they achieving the thing they're supposed to be achieving? And ultimately, we'll just know. And, you can try to get other mentors that are in the category, hey, does it bounce ideas off of them? But ultimately, again, you will know in your heart if you feel like this person's doing their best. And if they're not, my recommendation is cut them out as soon as possible. Once you start even having a little inkling that it's not working, it probably is irredeemable at that point. So you have to move on from them. And one more thing, you mentioned something about bringing on a co-founder. I do not advise that. If this is your idea and you are already crushing it, bring on senior talent, bring on VP of whatever. Do not bring on a co-founder, because like you've already gotten as far as you have on your own. Like it's really has to be a very, very special case for them to come on, because at the end of the day, it's your baby.
Hi, my name is. Can you hear me? My name is Hiten. I work with founders of startup robotics companies. My question for both of you is, what is the structure of your board? Have you had conflicts with the board, and how have you resolved them?
Yeah, I think nobody talks about the board, and like we're supposed to know how to run a board. That's a really great question. I didn't specifically have conflicts with the board. How I run the board, I think initially, so a lot of people run all hands, right? Like it's a company-wide meeting with you, the founder, kind of present stuff to the rest of the company, and at some point, other people in the company will present as well. My initial boards were my all hands. Like, so I was just like literally presenting stuff at the all hands and then like copy pasting that deck. And that was my board deck now, and presenting that to my investors. So it was very much more like a pulse on our business for the investors, and like showing them like what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and getting that feedback. It was not super formal. And we did that, I think, once a month. Now I have my board meetings like once every 6 weeks. Generally, I think they once a quarter when you grow, but I kind of like to have them more regularly, so that like there's no surprises for the investors. And like at the end of the day, if you have awesome investors, I want more of their time. I want them to work more for Codi, right? And the more time I have with them, the better. So like I try to do as many board meetings as I can. And now they're a bit more structured. So actually ask my investors, who in your portfolio companies do you think they have the best board meeting? And then I went to those founders and I was like, what is your board meeting format? And they shared with me like the structure and how they did it. And then I kind of followed that same structure.
And who's on your board?
Jeff Jordan at A16.
I meant like just in terms of you have investors, do you have anybody else?
2 co-founders, 2 investors.
My answer is short. I don't have a board. And I want to keep it that way as long as possible. I am the board.
So, I'm just gonna yell. This is messed up. Lunch is ready, but before we move over to the other room, let's give a round of applause for
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jacquelynne.